And this is a great story. And I think it's important to tell this story because it wasn't one-sided. And we're talking again World War I, talking about the Allied powers against the Axis powers, and we're talking about the British Expeditionary Forces against the might of the Turkish Empire. And it's right that there's a memorial here because the other side also sustained losses at the same time. But this story isn't directly connected to the war itself, but to the pilots of the Turkish Air Force. And we go back to the 8th of February 1914. Two pilots from the fledgling Turkish Air Force. A guy called Fethi Bey, the pilot, and his navigator Sadık Bey, who decided to take off from Istanbul, get to Damascus. On the way to Jerusalem, at Tel Piyot, there was a landing strip, and then from there to Cairo and Alexandria. On a trail, 1,700 miles, at a time when this really wasn't considered something that could easily be done. Their goal was to show that the fledgling Turkish Air Force could produce and raise the morale of the people leading into World War I, and two, to initiate the first airmail postal service between the dominions within the Turkish Empire. That was the reason. They took off on the 8th of February in these small planes made out of wood and fabric, where the wings were attached to the fuselage by single screws. Now, either they were stupid or they were brave. They were probably a bit of both. Really. Because to do it at that time, flying at 13,000 feet, with no oxygen masks, no real instruments, no GPS, and decide that's where we're heading, and they had to do extensive refueling stops because they could only hop every 200 or so kilometers. They didn't have the tank capacities that we have today. They took off from Istanbul, rain fell, fog arrived, one almost hit the mountain. One had to stop at Damascus. He's already had engine problems, so he stayed behind, and these two continued on. But they underestimated the fierce winds that occur here over winter from the east, the so-called Sharqiya. And guys, I can tell you these winds exist because for 17 years I lived on the top of that plateau, which is completely open, and the winds that come out over winter knocked the kids over in the kibbutz. Literally. You had to put stones in their pockets so the little kiddies wouldn't knock over, and it is true. It's not a story. It is true. So they did that stop, but they underestimated the winds. They came towards Haon, flying over the Kinneret, buffeted by the winds, their plane crashed, just in the fields outside of Haon. That was on the 27th of February, from the 8th to the 27th. On the 27th, they were waiting for them in Jerusalem at Tel Piyot, a massive welcoming committee for the Turkish Empire to welcome these two heroes who made 1,700-mile journey to get to here. But nothing happened. They didn't arrive. Then the Arabs from Samra on the other side said they saw this object fall from the skies and crashed. They raced to here and they found the remains of the plane and the bodies of the Turkish pilots. They ran to Tzemach, called the governor, the Ottoman governor in Tiberias. He immediately notified Istanbul and Damascus, the powers. They brought out a special team the next day, collected the remains of the bodies and the remnants of the plane, and then took them to Damascus to be buried just outside the great mosque of Damascus at the foot of the mausoleum of Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din, you have to remember, was the guy, and we'll talk about him when we get to Jerusalem, who knocked off the Crusaders back in 1187 and put paid to their continuous kingdom of Jerusalem between 1187 to 1191 when Richard came back and knocked him off. Another story. But, so they collected the remains and they came out, and this was 1914. Some months later, the Commission of Inquiry found that there was no malfunction with the plane. Well, how they could say that, I have no idea. In those days, with a piece of fabric, but it doesn't matter. That's what they said. But the two were hailed as state heroes with a state funeral, and then they built an obelisk that was here, that we're about to see, in memory of these pilots, and erected the memorial as it is. But it was forgotten over the years, until the 1990s, when Yair Faran, a member of Kibbutz Haon, a historian, read about this story. They knew that the obelisk existed here because it was in the fields of Haon, but decided there has to be a story towards here. He went and investigated further, understood the story that was here, and by himself began to reconstruct the area. He touched base with the Turkish embassy, who knew there was something here, but really didn't relate to it. They sent out he wrote to the embassy, and he said, look, we have a memorial centre here, right in the fields of Haon, and I want to construct a garden. It took a year before they answered him back. In 1915, the aviation attaché of the Turkish embassy came out, saw it, immediately was astounded. This is something that they knew these guys were heroes, but no one had talked about it for 70 years. 1995, they found the money. They put together this little garden. He put it all together himself. He's 75 years old, this guy. Put it all together himself. Since then, the Turkish embassy understands the importance of this. The head of the Turkish Air Force came out here with tears in his eyes to see what was the place where these two heroes of the state of Turkey were. And they have ceremonies here. They then invited Farhan and his wife to be guests of the Turkish Air Force to go back to Turkey to see the actual burial place of these two famous heroes. And in the year 2004, they added 2 more eagles. The eagles are the symbol of the Turkish Air Force. You'll see the 2 eagles here as well. And now they hold ceremonies to dedicate, even at a time when we have frosted relationships with our Mr. friend, Mr. Erdogan in Istanbul, who really doesn't like us here, but has no alternative, because he knows what we can give him, he can't get from anybody else. But at least the relationship between us and the Turkish Air Force and the remains of here, and you have to understand, this Fateh Bey is a state hero. The town of Fateh in Turkey, along the coast, is named after him. There's a postage stamp with him on it. There's an SMS card in Turkey that you can get with his photo on him. A real esteemed person. And so a great little story. And then people are like, what happened to the other plane? The other plane landed in Damascus. Well, after the state funeral, they continued on. And they made it all the way down on the way to Jerusalem to Jaffa. And in Jaffa, they landed on the beach. But then they took off. Come here. But then they took off and they crashed into the water. So they didn't make it. The pilot survived, the navigator died. But 3 months later, they sent out a 3rd plane. And the 3rd plane actually made the route all the way from Istanbul to Damascus, down to here, and on the way to Cairo and Alexandria to end the round circle and the saga in memory of these 2 great guys, the heroes of the Turkish Republic. So a great little story of 2 brave people, or 2 crazy people, who knows? Yerach Farhan says they're a bit of both. I mean, really, you had to have a lot of guts to do that in those days, to travel that. But let's go see the memorial.